بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Welcome back everyone to lecture 12. Inshallah, the bulk of today's lecture will be taken up to discuss the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which is the main event that takes place at the end of the year 6 of the Hijrah, and then that will segue into the year 7 of the Hijrah, in which the Prophet ﷺ begins the year by sending out these international letters to other heads of state. So these are the kind of like the two major topics that we want to talk about. Now, after the battle of the Ahzab, the battle of the ditch, and the Prophet ﷺ moving from a defensive posture to an offensive posture, and they go out and they quell all of the neighboring tribes, and then we took care of the issue of Al-Qurayda. The Prophet ﷺ took care of the issue of Qurayda, Bani Qurayda, and expelled them. So now the Prophet ﷺ is going to turn his efforts and his energy towards Mecca itself, because that's the source, other than some of the Jewish tribes in Medina that were instigating it, but the real source of the problem are the people of Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ, has this dream that they're going to go to perform Umrah, and then they go. They're prevented from going. There's a negotiation between the Quraysh and the Prophet ﷺ, which leads into the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. That's a kind of a peace treaty. Now, on the outward kind of analysis, the peace treaty looks like it's unfavorable to the Muslims. So one of the tasks of today's lecture is to talk about what we glean from it, why the Prophet ﷺ agreed to that, other than being guided by revelation, but why would the Prophet ﷺ do that? And we'll look at some of the consequences, the positive consequences that happened as a result, which is basically that the Prophet ﷺ can now attend to the dawah rather than worrying. And the Quraysh were not aware of that because they're looking at it only from one dimension. The Prophet ﷺ is looking at the issue from multi dimensions. So it actually turned out to be one of the greatest victories for the Prophet ﷺ, unbeknownst to the Mecca, and that began the rapid decline of the strength of the Meccans. And then, of course, with the letters of the heads of state, we enter into a completely new phase of the Sira altogether, where we see the Prophet ﷺ as an international statesman. So these, and we'll talk about the lessons of that. So these are the major points. We'll begin the discussion in the next clip, inshallah. All right. So today's lecture begins with Dhul Qa'dah of the 6th year of the Hijrah. So this is the 11th month of the year. It begins with a dream. The Prophet ﷺ has a dream that he's entering Mecca, that he's performing Umrah, and he had the keys to the Kaaba. So when he woke from the dream, he informed the companions. Of course, everybody got excited because they're like, "That's it. Mecca's ours. We're going to go back, etc., etc." So they prepare to travel, but many did not want to go. Many wanted to remain, so probably being fatigued by all of the fighting. They left Medina on Monday, the 1st of Dhul Qa'dah, in the 6th year of the Hijrah. So this begins the month. And Our Lady Salama radiallahu anha, she was the wife that accompanied the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. They were a total of 1,400, and they took no weapons with them, but they did have weapons. And the way I explain this to sort of my students typically is this is what we call EDC. This is like everyday carry. So if you lived at that time, you didn't go out of the house without some kind of knife or sword or dagger or something like that, because life necessitates that you're going to cut things and prepare food and things like that. So it's like a normal situation. So when you read that they had swords and whatnot, it's not like they had swords of battle. There's difference between, you have like a little pocket knife, let's say in today's language, and I have like a dagger today. I mean, if you walk around with a dagger, that's not an everyday carry, but a pocket knife is acceptable. A blade is acceptable. Or like a tool, like a multi-tool or something like that. I'm talking about in today's terms. So the swords that they were carrying back then were like the pocket knife. It's like the Swiss Army knife of today. It's like something that you had to happen. But they didn't take any weapons because they weren't planning to fight. They arrive in Dhul Hulayfa, or outside of Mecca, which is one of the points of Miqat. They make the ihram, take off their clothes, the men that is, they put on the white sheets for the ihram. But then some of the neighboring tribes outside of Mecca that were affiliated with Quraysh, they blocked them from proceeding. And it turns out that the Quraysh had heard of the advance of the Prophet ﷺ, And this was like an intentional kind of ploy by the Meccans at the time to block the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. So the Prophet ﷺ turned to the companions to ask for their advice. What should they do? And they all agreed that they didn't come to fight, and they would not let someone block them from the Kaaba, and they tried their best to proceed. After this decision was made, Khalid ibn Walid, who still had not become Muslim, went out with his cavalry regiment, and he saw that the Muslims were praying Salat al-Dhuhr, and he planned to attack them during this time. But at this moment, the prayer of fear was revealed, and because the prayer of fear was revealed, Khalid lost the element of surprise, because the prayer of fear, depending on where we talk about this in the fiqh class, depending on where the enemy is, there's always going to be a group of the believers standing guard, not doing ruku' and sujood. At any given moment, there's always a group of Muslims looking at the enemy, facing the enemy. It's not that they're all going to be prostration, in which case they could be taken. Trying to avoid bloodshed, conflict, the Prophet ﷺ took an unorthodox path towards Mecca, and this path is what led to Hudaybiyah, and that's why it's called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, because what we're about to narrate takes place, in this location. At one point, the camel of the Prophet ﷺ, al-Qaswa, it stopped, and the Prophet ﷺ, the one who stopped the elephant, stopped the camel. It's just kind of a little detail. And then they proceeded to a small river basin where the companions complained of thirst. The Prophet ﷺ gave him some arrows, and he said, place these arrows in the basin, and then it overflowed, or all of them were able to drink to their full. So one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. There was a man named Badil bin Warqa. He was an honest negotiator. He came to the Prophet ﷺ to warn him that Ka'b ibn Lu'ay is on the outside of Hudaybiyah, and he was ready to fight with the Prophet ﷺ. But the Prophet ﷺ said, look, we're just here to perform Umrah, but if we are forced to fight, or if we are attacked upon, we will fight. Now, there's kind of communications back and forth between the Meccan forces and the Prophet ﷺ, and he keeps emphasizing that he doesn't want to fight, but if pushed, he will fight. One of the negotiators from Quraysh that came was Urwa ibn Mas'ud al-Thaqafi. He went to see the Prophet ﷺ, and this is the famous story when he's talking to the Prophet, he keeps grabbing the Prophet's beard. I mean, it's very rude. I mean, I couldn't even imagine someone that, they keep touching your beard. The companions, kind of like tapped on his hand with like a shield, a sheathed sword. So the sword was in its scabbard. Remove your hand from the beard of the Prophet ﷺ. When Urwa goes back, he says, I've never seen anything like that. I've seen kings and Caesars and I've seen those rulers, but I've never seen anything like that. Some of the people of the Quraysh were upset because Urwa, when he came back, he said, let's give him a deal. Let's strike up a peace deal and let's just be done with this. So some of the Qurayshis were upset with that because they wanted to fight. So the people that wanted to fight, they kind of won in that moment, the argument, and they decided that they would attack the Muslims at night. So 70 to 80 fighters from Quraysh went out at night, but the Muslims, alhamdulillah, were able to thwart their advance, and it just, it didn't work. So when this is sort of like the tensions are rising, the Qurayshis are not really able to make a difference. The Prophet is insisting that we're going to go pray Umrah, we're all here for Umrah, etc. So to make a long story short, the Prophet had originally wanted to send Umar to Mecca to negotiate, but because Sayyidina Umar no longer had any family connections which could prevent them from killing him, he decided that he would send Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, who is well known and from the same family and clan as Abu Sufyan. So he said, okay, they're not going to kill one of their own, even though if he's a Muslim. So the Prophet told Sayyidina Uthman, please make it clear of the purpose and to offer them Islam. We're here to peacefully to perform Umrah, and we also offer you the opportunity to embrace Islam. Sayyidina Uthman, because he was a man of stature, a man of means, he was given safe passage to Mecca, and he conveyed the Prophet's message, ﷺ. And the Quraysh offered that he makes tawaf, but he said he didn't want to do that until the Prophet ﷺ made tawaf. Because the greeting of the Haram al-Sharif is to make tawaf. You don't pray 2 rak'ahs like to greet the mosque like you do in any other mosque. But in Mecca you make tawaf. So even at the time of the Jahili Arabs, they used to do that. But he refused. No, I'm not going to do that until the Prophet ﷺ does that. Uthman stayed longer than anticipated, and rumors started to spread that Uthman was killed. This was at the moment that the Prophet ﷺ took allegiance from the companions, called Bayatul Ridwan. This is mentioned in Surah Al-Fath, verse 18. And the Prophet ﷺ, he clasped his own hand and he said, "This is for Uthman." That Uthman is with us as well, hoping that the rumors were false and that he was still alive. Like allegiance that we're going to fight. I mean, if Sayyidina Uthman was killed, khalas, it's over. I mean, that's an act of war. We're going to fight. Even though we're in ihram and we don't have weapons, we're still going to fight. So, Quraysh sent Suhail ibn Amr to negotiate the peace with the Prophet ﷺ. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw Suhail approach, he knew that meant Quraysh wanted a peace. They didn't send like a hardliner, or they didn't send like Khalid ibn Walid, was like a general, or something like that. They sent Suhail. So he said, "Okay, good news. We're going to get out of this, inshallah." So they start they start negotiating, the Prophet ﷺ and Suhail. And this is where the famous story when the Prophet ﷺ said, write, Imam Ali ﷺ was the scribe. So he said, "Ali, write Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim." And Suhail said, "We don't know ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Say Bismika Allahumma." So the Prophet ﷺ told Imam Ali, erase Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and write Bismika Allahumma. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, "This is what Muhammad Rasulullah negotiates." And then Suhail said, "Well, we don't acknowledge that you are Rasulullah. Say, this is what Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, negotiates with Suhail, the son of Amr." So the Prophet ﷺ instructed Ali, erase that and write what Suhail said. And then Imam Ali said, "Wallahi, I will never erase it. I'll never erase your name, Rasulullah." The Prophet ﷺ, "Show me where on the paper it is." And he took, he wet his fingers and he kind of erased it. And they continued to the negotiations, which we'll pick up in the next clip, inshallah. Okay, so what are the 4 conditions of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? Condition number 1 is that the Prophet ﷺ would return to Medina this year and come to Mecca next year to perform Umrah. Number 2, that there would be peace between Mecca and Medina for 10 years. Number 3, anyone is free to choose sides, and this extends to tribal affiliation. So anybody that wants to join Medina can join, and any tribe that wants to join Mecca can join. And then lastly, number 4, any Meccan that fled to Medina without permission has to be returned to Mecca, meaning a Muslim, that is. The Prophet ﷺ called Imam Ali to write up this negotiation, and I told you a little bit about the story of how the writing and the story of the scribe situation. Of course, initially the Muslims with the Prophet ﷺ, they saw this as a defeat. What do you mean we're not going to perform Umrah? We're in ihram, and didn't you have this dream? Didn't Allah promise you victory? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Did I say this year? I didn't say that the dream meant this year, but I just had the dream, and we'll come next year." So there was the immediate response of the companions is that this is bad. Somehow we lost something. So the Prophet ﷺ, sensing that there was tension, he went into his tent, and Salama told him, radiallahu anhu, "Don't worry, you go out, you shave your head and do your sacrifice, and everyone will follow what you do." And the Prophet ﷺ did that, and the companions complied, and they were very sad to comply. So this is sort of how we reach at the stage of the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, and the Meccans, they feel like they won because they made the Prophet ﷺ go back immediately. The companions also feel like they lost because they were not able to perform the Umrah. So everyone is focused on the immediate thing, which is we're going to perform Umrah, because they took the dream as like a literal interpretation in like an immediate time frame. Now we'll see that the Prophet ﷺ has a completely different perspective. After this episode, some women came to give allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, and he took their bay'ah. And it was at this time in revealed Surah Al-Mumtahina, verses 10 to 12, that the companions parted with their non-Muslim wives. Okay, so let's kind of pause from the narration of the Sira and kind of do a little bit of an analysis of kind of what's happening with this treaty. What this treaty did, the fact that they sent Suhail to negotiate, before any words were uttered, the fact that the Quraysh were willing to enter into negotiation automatically acknowledges the Muslims as a state, the state of Medina, and the Prophet as the head of that state. You're not going to negotiate with a renegade. You're not going to negotiate with a criminal. You're not going to negotiate a peace treaty with except a entity that is at equal footing with yours. So I mean, it's as simple as that. So the fact, and the Quraysh were not really aware of that on the outset. They, like the companions, is to be fair, were only looking at the immediate issue, which is performing the Umrah. So the fact that there is this negotiation to start out with, this means that the Prophet ﷺ is a force to be reckoned with. And in this 10-year peace treaty, the Quraysh are giving the Muslims the opportunity to spread, because part of it is that anybody that wants to join the Prophet ﷺ can, and anyone who wants to join the Meccans can. What the Qurayshis at this time did not realize is that this was a very attractive da'wah, and it remains still today. I mean, it's the fastest growing religion, and we're on the cusp of becoming the most dominant religion on earth in the next 20 to 30 years. So it's an attractive proposition. Now, people that don't want to believe in Islam or don't believe in Islam, they don't understand that. Like, why would you follow this religion that puts quote unquote restrictions on you? Because you can't just do everything that you want to do, and we don't see it as restrictions. We see it as avoiding the haram and living in the halal, and therefore we have a good life in this life and in the world to come, inshallah. So people that just want to do whatever they want now, they're like, oh, this is too inconvenient. But we know that the foolish person wants to do everything now. The smart person, paces themselves. Delayed gratification, which we were taught when we were young. I mean, in secular schools, so that part I don't get. But subhanAllah, same thing from the time of the Quraysh, the kuffar of Quraysh till now, is that this was a strategic mistake from the kuffar, because now the Prophet has 10 clear years in which to spread the da'wah. If only, we're in year 6 of the Hijrah. If only 6 years of establishment of Medina brought all of this, imagine what 10 more years will bring. I mean, it's not far-fetched to say that if you were to estimate or guess, all of Arabia, maybe except a few couple tribes of Mecca, would have become Muslim. So this is a huge mistake on the Quraysh, and people couldn't see it on both sides, but the Prophet ﷺ saw it very clearly. Now, another thing to keep in mind is, other than the kind of initial skirmishes outside of Medina that the Prophet ﷺ led after the battle of the Ahzab, but those are really responses. All of the battles up until this point, all of them were initiated by Quraysh, not the Prophet ﷺ. So the fact that they're going to issue a peace deal means that the Quraysh are acknowledging defeat, not overtly, but that's certainly what it means. Because if they started all of the conflicts, and then these conflicts lead to them to agreeing to a 10-year peace treaty, then they are acknowledging that they were not able to dislodge, to thwart, to stop, to kill, to quash, all of the whatever you want to say of the Prophet ﷺ's advance. So this was a tremendous victory, and this is why it's kind of memorialized in Surah Al-Fath. Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. Indeed, we have given you a great opening. So what great opening? We didn't perform Umrah. The Prophet ﷺ said, did I say this year? Don't worry, this is the victory. This is khalas, we won. It's over. Now it's just a matter of following the steps until it's over. Okay. Now, an interesting kind of footnote to all of this is that there were some renegades. There were some Muslims that didn't like what was happening to the point that they disobeyed the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Basir, he used to be persecuted in Mecca. He finally came fleeing to Medina. And then the Quraysh sent two, this is now post al-Hudaybiyah, the Quraysh sent two people after him. As they were traveling, and they captured him and brought him back. As they were traveling back to Mecca, Abu Basir killed one of them, and then he came back to Medina. And the Prophet ﷺ was very upset when he saw him. He said, "You're going to fan the flame of wars. This is in exact contradiction to the peace treaty that we just signed with the Meccans." So Abu Basir now is stuck. He wants to be with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is basically saying, "I'm not going to sanction what you've done. You can't stay here." Obviously, he's not going to go back to Mecca. So what does he do? He flees to Jeddah, or Juddah, as it's pronounced correctly. And there he stayed with Abu Jandal and some of the other renegades. Abu Jandal is the son of Suhail ibn Amr, okay, who negotiated the peace treaty. So he's another one of those renegades that didn't like this peace treaty, especially since his father on the Quraysh, who was a disbeliever, signed it. So he and Abu Basir and kind of a small group of renegade Muslims, they go to Jeddah and they kind of hang out. Eventually, those renegades totaled 300 people. This is a really fascinating part of the Sira. So now they're like not accepted they're Muslim, 100%. They're not accepted by the Prophet ﷺ because he doesn't sanction them because it's going to fan the flames of war. They can't go back to Mecca. So what do? They start attacking the caravans of Quraysh. So the Meccans came to Medina to complain to the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, don't we have peace between us? What's going on? And then, to make a long story short, in the negotiation, the Prophet ﷺ is clear that I'm not sanctioning this. So the Meccans agree, okay, just so we can continue the peace treaty, and this shows how weak of a position the Quraysh are in, we will let Abu Basir and his people come to Medina. And we'll just kind of ignore that and keep going. And the Prophet ﷺ sends a letter to Abu Basir explaining to him the situation. And he receives this letter, but by this time he's on his deathbed, and he's so happy that the Prophet ﷺ finally was pleased with him and he found his relief, and then he succumbed, but he died when he was happy nonetheless. And inshallah we'll pick up the discussion in the next and last clip for today's lecture. So, Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, end of year 6 of the Hijrah. The renegades in Jeddah, I think, is kind of a cool footnote. It's not really a footnote, it's a cool sub-story within the story. And now we enter into the year 7 of the Hijrah, and we begin with the conversion. Now is the real kind of earthquake for Mecca. We have the conversion of Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu anhu, Khalid ibn Walid, Uthman ibn Talha, they all converted. I mean, this is a tremendous blow. Khalid ibn Walid, just, a month prior, he was going to attack the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims while they were praying. SubhanAllah. It becomes Muslim. It's like a major general. So it's a major defection. Already you can kind of see the signs of victory. So now we enter into the year 7, in which the Prophet ﷺ, the bulk of the discussion now is sending the letters to the heads of state. I mean, he wouldn't have been able to do this if he was constantly defending Medina against Quraysh. So they allowed him, they gave him the opportunity to do this. And here we see the Prophet ﷺ as a world leader now. In Muharram of the 7th year of the Hijrah, so the first month of the year, the Prophet ﷺ takes a ring with his name on it, Muhammad Rasulullah, and it's Allah Rasul Muhammad from top to bottom, so you read it from bottom to top, so Allah is always top. And this was the ring that he used to seal the documents with. Maybe I should have brought my ring. I have a sample of it to show you, but maybe if I remember before tomorrow's recording. And so this is sort of the protocol. The Sahaba told him, nobody in our day and age accepts a letter unless it's sealed, it's stamped. He said, okay, good, so then I have to do that. And then he also was very careful in choosing the ambassadors. The ambassadors had to look good, dress well, had to speak well, even if they didn't know the language of the other people, but they had to be a physical good representation. And in this, for those of you that are interested in diplomacy, there are many lessons from the Sira for young diplomats and the people that are in the foreign service in any country. The Najashi dies at this time. The Prophet ﷺ prays the absent prayer on him. And then the one letter is to the Muqawqas of Egypt, the leader of Egypt. This was sent by Hatim ibn Abi Balta'a, who was an ambassador. Hatim ibn Abi Balta'a is very important because he will have a major story will involve him a little later when we talk about the conquest of Mecca. The Muqawqas honored the letter and wrote a response acknowledging the prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ, but he did not convert. And the Muqawqas sent back to the Prophet ﷺ a gift, a mule. The mule's name was called Duldul, and Duldul lasted up until Muawiyah's time, when Muawiyah was the Khalifa. He also gave him 2 slave girls, Maria and Sirin, and a vat of honey from the city in southern Egypt called Benha or Binha. The Prophet ﷺ offered Islam to both of the sisters. Maria converted, Sirin did not. So the Prophet ﷺ married Maria, and Sirin was gifted to Hassan ibn Thabit, whom he married. Sirin or Shirin, there's 2 narrations. And this is the opinion that I follow, that the Prophet ﷺ freed her and married her. And there is some evidence that support, well, obviously I wouldn't adopt it if there was no evidence, that after the Prophet ﷺ passed, Maria, who is the mother of Ibrahim, the son of the Prophet who died, she lived in an area of Medina where the wives of the Prophet left. So a lot of the Sira scholars say, well, that means that she must have been freed and she was a wife, not a slave. That's Egypt. And then the Prophet ﷺ says a letter to Persia, to Khusro II, and he said, which was a complete opposite reception of the letter. He sends this letter with Abdullah ibn Hudayfa al-Shami. He went to Bahrain, and then from Bahrain, current day Bahrain, he went to Persia. When Khusro saw the letter, he tore up the letter, and he sent word to Badan, who was his agent in Yemen, to arrest the Prophet ﷺ. Can you imagine that? The Prophet ﷺ said, when he heard the story, he said, may Allah tear his kingdom the way he tore my letter. And that's what happened. Badan sent 2 thugs to Medina to confront the Prophet ﷺ. They came to Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ, okay, thank you for coming, let's talk tomorrow. And then overnight, Khusro was killed by his son Shiro. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. This was on Tuesday, the 10th of Jamad al-Awwal, the 7th year of the Hijrah, which in the Gregorian calendar is the 28th of February, the year 628. The Prophet ﷺ informs them of this, and Badan ends up converting, as well as the rest of Persians in Yemen. Then the Prophet ﷺ sends a letter to the Byzantines or the Romans. I have in my notes something interesting. Oh yeah, okay, so this was Flavius Heraclius Augustus, or who in Islamic sources is called Heraclius. In my notes, I say that he died in February the 11th, the year 641. Dihya al-Kalbi radiallahu anhu was, Dihya ibn al-Kalbi was the one sent to him, and Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu was also there he has still not converted, was also there to intercept Dihya's diplomatic mission. So they kind of fight in front of Heraclius. Heraclius says, there's no lying, you have to be honest. Abu Sufyan was very insulted. Well, how could I lie? I'm the Sayyid of my people. So he asks him all these questions. Heraclius asked Abu Sufyan about his nasab, about his lineage. Did anyone say what he said before him? Does he come from a kingly family? Who follows him? Do they increase or decrease? And all of the questions. And then Abu Sufyan keeps asking, answering. So Heraclius said, well, if what you say is true, then this man will conquer the earth that I'm standing on. This actually took place in Jerusalem. So the letter, Heraclius was in the Levant at the time in Jerusalem. And he said, if I were to meet him, I would wash his feet. But I knew he was going to come, but I thought he would come from someplace. So Heraclius, this Caesar, was an educated man. On the way back, Dihya was attacked by the tribe of Jurhum. So the Prophet ﷺ said Zayd ibn Haritha to retaliate with 500 fighters. and obviously these are more than the fighters of Badr. This was a major victory, and this was necessary to preserve the honor of Islam. And this was also, you can't, attack a diplomat. Okay, then we have the letter to Bahrain, to Al-Mundhir ibn Sawi, who was the leader of Bahrain. The ambassador was Ala ibn al-Hadrami. Some became Muslims, but others remained Jews and Zoroastrians. The Prophet ﷺ responded to his ambassador to leave people in their religious belief. The Muslims pay zakah, but the non-Muslims will pay jizya. This became a standard sunnah in dealing with other faiths, established the sunnah of the people of the book with them. So this is an important note in the seerah, because some of the people in Bahrain were Zoroastrian. A lot of modern Muslims have the false notion that Ahlul Kitab only means Jews and Christians, but it's a larger category for us, as you can see. Then I'm just rushing because I want to finish before the time ends. We have the letter to Yamama. The leader there was Hawdha ibn Ali. The ambassador was Salit bin Amr al-Amiri. He was received well, but Hawdha wanted to be a prophet ﷺ, after Sayyidina Muhammad died. I mean, he didn't understand the prophet thing. After this episode, shortly, the leader of Yamama died, and the Prophet ﷺ said, from this area, a liar will come from him. And this was a foretelling of Musaylima al-Kadhab. Then there was a letter to Damascus, to the leader there called Al-Harith ibn Abi Shamr al-Ghassani. The ambassador was Shuja ibn Wahb. And he received the ambassador very badly. He said, who is this that seeks to take my kingdom? He wanted Heraclius to join him to fight the Prophet ﷺ, but Heraclius refused. And then the last note I have for today's lecture is the king of Oman. The ambassador sent was Amr ibn al-As, who was of a diplomatic level already before he became Muslim. There were huge delays because Oman was co-ruled by two brothers. So when Amr ibn al-As went, they're just like kind of giving him the runaround for days. And then he finally enters Islam. Oman enters Islam. Okay, yeah. So those are some of the major letters that were sent. As you can see, immediately, just months after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Prophet ﷺ is doing that, and now people are starting to accept Islam or at least acknowledge the leadership of the Prophet ﷺ. And that takes us to right before the issue of Khaybar, which we'll talk about in tomorrow's lecture. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina maulana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's lecture, we were able to cover the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, which is a huge, substantial victory for the Prophet ﷺ. They are able to negotiate peace with the Meccans, which automatically means that the Meccans failed in their ability to stop or kill or squash the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims, and gave the Prophet ﷺ a runway of 10 years of peace. Of course, as we'll know shortly, it doesn't last that long. The Qurayshis break it, and the Prophet then conquers Mecca. But anyway, at the time, I don't want to give it all away. The Prophet now has 10 clear years, no agitation, and he uses that time to start to spread Islam around. There were some renegades. We talked about that and how the renegades had gathered in Jeddah. And the Prophet ﷺ was approached by the Qurayshis to take care of this, because this was technically a breach of the treaty. The Prophet and ﷺ and the people of Mecca negotiated that Abu Basir and his fellow renegades they'll get a pass and they'll join Medina. But Abu Basir dies before he's able to go to Medina, but he receives the letter from the Prophet ﷺ. And then I went down some of the major letters that the Prophet ﷺ sent out. And this enters us into this diplomatic international diplomacy phase, which is a huge aspect of a siyasatu shar'iyya in Islam, and something that is very rich. We have a huge, rich tradition when it comes to diplomacy. Now, even though a lot of us are studying the Sharia to be teachers and to teach the Sharia, as a carrier of the Sharia and the sciences, you must be diplomatic. So even though you might not represent a head of state in the formal diplomatic sense, you are representing the faith and the traditions of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I don't want people to think that just because we're talking about diplomacy or I'm just a student, it doesn't count. It applies to me. It applies very much to us. The way we dress, the way we talk, the way we deal with people of other faiths and other traditions, and even people that have enmity towards us, the way we carry ourselves, the way we try to be positive, the way, all of that we glean from this aspect of the ambassadors, the letters, how the Prophet ﷺ responded, etc. You must carry yourself diplomatically, especially in matters of the deen. And there are, a whole gambit of responses to positive, to lukewarm, to aggressive, as we saw. And this will carry itself forward when we get to Amil Wufud. But for now, this is where we'll stop. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.